Good morning, EKU Libraries followers, and welcome to our Focus on Scholarship Facebook series. My name is Ashley Cole, and today I'm talking with Dr. Nikifor Spock, Professor of History at EKU since 2000. Dr. Spock's research explores Russian history pre-1700 with a focus on the Russian Orthodox Church, and in particular monasticism. We're here today to discuss Dr. Spock's recent publication, The Anchorite and the Cenobium, which examines the short, little-known life of Nikifor. So what can you tell us about the life of Nikifor?
Well, this is an interesting life. It is short. It's only 4 folio in a 17th century collection from the Solovki Monastery, or more commonly known as Solovki in English, up in the White Sea region of Russia. And it's a saint's life written about a hermit who never became a saint, which is rather interesting. We don't know very much about the hermit men and women off in the wilderness who never became praised as saints. And so this opens just a little window into some of the issues that developed in their lives. And it grew out of my dissertation and my work on the Solovki Monastery, which is in 2 parts. I do a great deal of work on the administration of the monastery and its interaction with the local community. And I also have done a fair amount of work on the lives of the saints of Solovki and their miracle stories and that interaction with the local population. But Nikifor was interesting because he gives a good deal of insight into the monastery and how it tried to deal with some of its tensions. And yet he never had any miracles, and he's not praised within the church. So it was an interesting short text to discover and to delve into.
So you already kind of answered this a bit, but why did you decide to examine Nikifor, considering how little is known about him? Why is he significant?
Well, because the text existed, and my work a little over 20 years ago, which was my dissertation, was attempting to get a somewhat holistic view of monastic life. So I worked with a broad variety of sources, from treasury books to donation lists, charters from the czars, saints' lives, liturgical instructions, many different things. But the lives were interesting because primarily they had been written prior to 1645. They'd been written about the main leaders of the monastery or their fellow founders. And this was really an unknown life. It was partially published in one 19th century catalog of the monastery library. And I focused on it because it was there. And it also gave insight into another spiritual element of the monastery, which was that of the hermit who never became a leader within the cloister. All of the other saints' lives were about leaders, so that made it particularly interesting.
So does the obscurity of the life of Nikifor convey something about monastic life or the Russian Orthodox Church in general?
Well, I think it might, but I think as far as I've taken this examination, I think illuminates the tensions within the Solovki Monastery at the time. It was one of Russia's 3 largest monasteries, had vast land holdings, and had an extensive trade network. And it was what is known as a Cenobium, or a communal monastery. But when one reached a certain point within the monastery, if one wished to retire from the communal life and live as a hermit in contemplation, that was called receiving the schema. It's a particular headgear that's worn, and the position of the schema was of a very high-level hermit, someone deeply spiritual. And Nikifor's life is about a young man, we're not sure of the age, he's called a youth, who deeply wanted to be tonsured and become a monk. And the monastery would not allow it. He was too young, he was not yet ready. They made him a novice, and he had read deeply, his life says. He was fascinated by the life of Mark Franceschi, who is a 4th century hermit known better as Mark of Athens. And Nikifor, being inspired by that life, ran off into the wilderness naked, without any clothes. The life says he took off his belt and everything, and went into the woods. And indications in the life suggest that the monks tried to bring him back. They would have been responsible for him as a youth. It's described as demons beating him and telling him to go back to the monastery, i.e., re-enter this organized life in which he'd been made a novice and was supposed to be obedient and do what he was told, or go to the shore. Solovki's on an island in the middle of the White Sea. So the life suggests that demons beat him, telling him either go back to the cloister or get lost. And instead, Nikifor remained in the wilderness for, if I recall correctly, 15 years. And the life talks of his difficulties, the lack of food, the elements, mainly the beatings. But what's interesting is that he ended up having interaction with the monastery. Elders from the monastery brought him bread and spoke to him at length. And at the end of his story, there's a miracle in which he walks on the whole lake that's behind the monastery. But that's never then taken any further in description. And so it ends up with this interesting tension between the youth and the elders, the hermit wannabe, and the structure of the communal monastery. But also it is playing up the deep religious zeal of the person who wants to be a hermit and does not give up on that life, and so ends his life finally being tonsured for the last 3 years of his life as the monk Nikita, but that name is never used in the life except in the report of his death. So they always spoke of him as Nikifor, his youthful name. So it's really an interesting piece.
How did you go about completing this research?
Well, I'm very fortunate that EKU's interlibrary loan was helpful, I have to say. But Ohio State University has a wonderful medieval collection of medieval Slavic manuscripts with an excellent secondary resource collection to back it up. And they've been very good to me over the years, and they greatly helped me with some of the secondary research I needed to do to contextualize it more, and were very helpful with sourcing. They've got some of the published primary sources I needed to then compare Nikifor's life to what my next project is going to be. Well, the next project is done and has been submitted for consideration for publication. It compares Nikifor's life to the life of Mark Franceschi, who supposedly was his inspiration. And so that was fun to go back and read 17th century texts of the 4th century saint Mark Franceschi. So I was reading the text that would have been known at the time of Nikifor about Mark Franceschi to see where the commonalities are, and we don't know who wrote Nikifor's life, so you can't draw direct comparisons to such and such an event happened in the life of Mark Franceschi, and that's why there's something similar in Nikifor's life. But it does appear that whoever wrote this brief little description of the unknown hermit also knew of Mark Franceschi, and so whether the inspiration was to Nikifor or to the author or both is hard to say. But it's been interesting to read the way that Mark Franceschi was described to the Orthodox world, and then the way that Nikifor was described. And Mark was also a hermit, but he was not a youth. He was an adult around age 30 when he went off. And he left Athens and went to North Africa, and the tale is that he lived on a mountain for 60-some years, and in great hardship, and eventually was given the gift of hair all over his body to help against the elements. And so, and he's finally found by a monk who went looking for him, having heard from him. And there's some very interesting comparisons that can be made, as well as the contrasts between the two texts. And so Ohio State Library and EKU Library together were extremely helpful to me in being able to do that level of research. And there's more that can be done if I don't get sidetracked by another topic.
Well, I greatly enjoy reading about the life of Nikifor, so I'm very much looking forward to your comparative work on Franceschi.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you, Dr. Spock, for speaking with us today. We've posted links to citations to the work we've discussed today in the comments below on Facebook Live. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment in Facebook, and we'll be sure to follow up. Thank you again.